Well, good evening, boys and girls. Miss Steppas here. I'm so excited to be doing your book this evening before you go to bed. I chose one of my favorites. My mom read it to me when I was little, and now I'm reading it to my classes every year because it sends a really good message. And it also makes you realize how important it is to be a really good friend. So this is called Enemy Pie, and it's written by Derek Munson. If you're wondering right now what enemy pie is, you're about to find out. And if you've never heard of it, oh boy, you're in for a treat. Here we go, enemy pie. And there's the title page. It should have been the perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks. And I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been the perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved to town. He moved into the neighborhood right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend Stanley, he was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved to the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up right in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Enemy number 1, Jeremy Ross. Dad, he understood stuff like this. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off of the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn out piece of paper. It had faded writing on it. Dad held it up and he squinted real close at it. Enemy pie, he said. I wonder what that is. You may be wondering what exactly is in enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything about it. I will tell you this, he says. Enemy pie is the fastest way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think I needed those. I gave him gum I'd been chewing all day. He gave it right back. So what do you think they need for enemy pie? Look at all the yucky things he brought his dad. Ugh. I'm in trouble with the page. There we go. I went out to play alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me, and all the while I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer. After all, if the pie works. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what would it look like? Ugh. But when I was in the backyard, looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from my kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went in to ask Dad what the smell was. Enemy pie should not smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie was going to be bad, your enemy would never eat it. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. All right, friends, let me back up a little bit. There we go. The buzzer rang and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie thing worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or maybe it made their breath stinky. Maybe it made them cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He would not tell me a thing about enemy pie. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend one whole day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure? Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one whole day with Jeremy Ross, and then poof, he'd be out of my hair for good. I rode my bike to his house, and I knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. Can you play? I asked. He looked confused. Well, I'll go ask my mom, he said. He came back with shoes in hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. You boys better stay out of trouble, she said. She was smiling. Boys and girls, right now you should be thinking, what is enemy pie? It's not making sense, is it? I'm a bit confused as well. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and we threw them at the neighborhood girls. But we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed kind of nice. But of course, I could not tell Dad that, since he had worked so hard to make enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they did not have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in, can we go in it? He asked. I knew he was going to ask me that, but he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies are not allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch. And he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. Okay, I said, but hold on. I climbed up ahead of him into my treehouse, and I tore the enemy list off of the wall. I had a checkerboard for some cards in the treehouse. We played games until my dad called us in for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him when he came out to get us. We tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner. My favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut into 8 thick slices of pie. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Uh-oh. Dad dished up 3 plates of enemy pie, and set them side by side with big pieces and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed 1 to me, 1 to Jeremy, and 1 to himself. Wow, said Jeremy, looking at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at this point that I began to panic. I didn't want Jeremy to eat the enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. I didn't want him to eat it. Jeremy! Don't eat it! It's bad pie! I think it's poisonous or something! Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. Right before reaching into his mouth, he crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny again. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. A true hero. If it's not so bad, Jeremy asked, then why is your dad already eaten half? I turned to look at my dad, and sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all that he said. I sat there watching them both eat enemy pie. For a few seconds, Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of us was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough. So I just took a tiny bite. Delicious, I said. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on the trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, well, I still don't know how to make it, and I wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy. So friends, the book started with a little boy who had somebody he just did not like. They were not friends, he did not like them, but when his dad offered to make him something that might hurt him and made them be friends, turned out to be a really good situation. He ended up being his best friend. And if you noticed on that last page, he lost his enemy. So, do we think enemy pie really had those things in it? Worms and dirt, or it made your hair fall out? Well, maybe. But what Dad made was friends. Dad helped him find a friend out of his enemy. And that's something you can remember when you come to school every day, friends. Friends are everywhere. You have friends in your teachers, you have friends in your classmates, you have friends in specials. We all love having you in school. And that's one thing that you can always remember. You have friends everywhere, not enemies. Thank you for joining me tonight, and I'm so glad you got to hear one of my favorite books. I hope you liked it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you here next week. Bye, friends. Sleep tight. Good night.